Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely mind-bending topic. We're looking at Who's in Charge? Free Will and the Science of the Brain by Michael S. Gazzaniga. We're going to break down the summary and some absolutely crucial key takeaways from this amazing book. So, a huge, warm welcome to this journey of knowledge. Get ready for some truly fascinating insights today. Oh, and hey, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Come on, let's learn something totally new together with Prafulla Sharma. All right, let's look at the agenda for today. We've got 6 key areas to cover, from the brain's architecture all the way to society and the law. But let's just jump right into the big picture. Gazzaniga's central claim here is frankly profound. He says that free will is entirely real, but, just not in the way we usually imagine it. So we're kicking off with Section 1, the big picture. The core idea here is that free will is a macroscopic property. Think about it. It doesn't actually live in your individual neurons, your synapses, or those tiny milliseconds of brain activity. Instead, it's something that emerges. It emerges from entire systems, complex interactions, and different layers of organization. We're talking everything from neural modules in your head all the way up to societal norms. This whole book is basically a wild journey through neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, and even the law. And it all converges on this one massive question. If the brain is just a physical machine, then who, or maybe what, is actually in charge of our actions? Moving into Section 2, we look at the brain's modular architecture. Gazzaniga calls it a federation, not a dictatorship. He completely dismantles this common myth that we have a perfectly unified brain. Instead of a single central command center calling all the shots, your brain is actually a federation of different modules. And each of these modules is highly specialized, super fast, and surprisingly, often completely independent. To break that down a bit more, things like vision, movement, language, and emotion, they all have their own dedicated circuits. And these circuits run in parallel. It's not some strict top-down hierarchy. Gazzaniga's famous split-brain studies actually show that our brain hemispheres can act completely independently, sometimes even with conflicting goals. So why does this matter to us? Well, if the brain is modular like this, the idea of a single decider inside our heads is biologically false. Decisions actually just emerge from the chaotic interactions among all these different modules. This brings us to a fascinating concept, the interpreter. This is really the brain's narrative engine. It's actually one of Gazzaniga's most influential discoveries, this left hemisphere interpreter, which is basically a specific module that constructs explanations for our behavior. It's wild. When your right hemisphere does something, your left hemisphere, the part that handles language, literally invents a story to explain it. And the crazy part? It's not actually lying, it's just trying to make sense of things post hoc. This interpreter creates the illusion that we have a unified self. The implications here are huge. It means a lot of what we think we decide is actually just a justification we make up after the fact. It's essential for a sense of identity, for sure, but it's also the root cause of our biases, our rationalizations, and those moments when we just completely confabulate reality. All right, Section 3, Action Before Awareness. This is where we talk about consciousness as a sort of supervisory system. Gazzaniga looks at decades of research that shows our brains actually initiate actions before we are even consciously aware of them. Let's expand on that. Studies show that motor cortex activity actually happens milliseconds before you consciously intend to move. Emotional reactions, they fire off before you can consciously label them. Basically, our habits and routines are just running on autopilot. But hey, here is the real twist. Gazzaniga argues that this absolutely does not disprove free will. Instead, it just proves that our consciousness is acting as a supervisor rather than a micromanager. So how does that work? Well, we have to understand emergence. This is a concept Gazzaniga borrows from complexity science. Look at it this way. An individual neuron doesn't think. But when you get vast networks of neurons firing together, those patterns literally become thoughts. It's exactly like how water has properties that you just won't find in individual hydrogen or oxygen atoms. The mind has properties that simply don't exist at the level of a single neuron. And here is exactly why this matters for the concept of free will. Free will isn't some tiny micro-event happening in a single brain cell. It is a macro property of the entire interconnected system. Next up is Section 4, Society and the Law. Here we look at the social mind and responsibility as a system-level concept. Remember, humans evolved in groups. Our brains are literally hardwired for cooperation, for following social norms, and for making moral judgments. To dig a little deeper, morality itself isn't just some biological reflex, it's a social construct.
But hey, social constructs are still very real, just like money, laws, or institutions are real. Responsibility actually exists at the level of the whole person interacting with others, not at the microscopic level of brain cells. The key insight to remember here? Neurons don't go to jail. People do. That naturally leads us to the rather complicated marriage between neuroscience and the law. We're seeing this more and more today, right? Courts are increasingly using brain scans to argue for diminished responsibility in criminal cases. But we really need to analyze this carefully. Brain scans show correlations, but they don't show causes. Sure, a tumor or a brain lesion might influence someone's behavior, but it absolutely doesn't erase their agency. The legal system is built on intent, on choice, and on action, not on whether a specific neuron fired. Gazzaniga's stance on this is super clear. Neuroscience can definitely inform the law, but there is no way it can replace our moral reasoning. All right, moving to Section 5, the free will debate. Gazzaniga calls this a false dichotomy, and he strongly critiques both of the extreme sides of this argument. On one side, you have hard determinism. This is the belief that literally everything is caused by prior events, so free will has to be a total illusion. Then, on the far other side, you have radical libertarianism. This argues that free will is completely uncaused, basically saying that humans somehow magically transcend biology. Gazzaniga offers us a much more logical middle path. He says, yes, the brain is mechanistic. Of course it is. But complex systems have the ability to regulate themselves. Free will emerges from that self-regulation, not from some kind of magical randomness. Think about a thermostat. A thermostat is a completely deterministic machine, right? But it still successfully regulates temperature based on feedback. In a very similar way, we humans regulate our behavior through our goals, our social norms, and our own self-control. He describes the brain as a constraint satisfaction machine. Basically, your brain is just constantly resolving conflicts between all those competing modules we talked about earlier. It's an endless battle. Impulse versus inhibition, emotion versus pure logic, ingrained habits versus new intentions, and short-term rewards versus your long-term goals. Free will is what emerges from this incredibly dynamic balancing act. The real key idea here, you aren't just one single captain steering a ship. You are the entire system that resolves all those internal conflicts. Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, the emergent self. This is the real seat of our responsibility. In his final chapters, Gazzaniga makes the compelling case that the self isn't just some illusion, it's a real emergent agent. Let's unpack that. Your self isn't hiding in one specific neuron or a single region of your brain. It is a massively complex pattern of activity happening across the entire brain. And that pattern is constantly interacting with society, with norms, and with human culture at large. Why does this matter? Because free will is essentially the capacity of this emergent self to act and make choices within those societal constraints. So let's wrap this up with a final synthesis. Neuroscience absolutely does not kill free will. Instead, it brilliantly reframes it. Free will is not some tiny microscopic event in your head, it's a macroscopic property of your whole being. Responsibility is entirely real because it's people, not individual neurons, that act, make choices, and participate in society. The bottom line, we are not just helpless puppets controlled by our brains. We are true agents, shaped by our biology, for sure, but operating at a much higher, complex level of organization. Well, I really hope you enjoyed this explainer and found this summary as mind-blowing as I did. Please don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get more of these deep dive, informative updates. Thanks so much for watching and keep questioning.